What is real life actually like on the roof of the world? In Tibet, people live where the air is dangerously thin. Trains supply oxygen. Ancient funeral traditions challenge everything outsiders expect, and pilgrims travel extraordinary distances for their faith. Behind the breathtaking mountains lies a world of extreme survival, sacred traditions, and realities you may never have imagined. Tibet's extraordinary traditional funeral ritual. High on the Tibetan Plateau, where vast mountains rise beneath an endless sky, there is an ancient funeral tradition that may surprise almost anyone encountering it for the first time. It is commonly known in English as a sky burial, a practice deeply connected to Tibetan Buddhist beliefs about death, impermanence, and the cycle of rebirth. To outsiders, the idea can initially seem shocking. But within its traditional, cultural, and religious context, the ceremony is treated with great seriousness and respect. In Tibetan Buddhism, the physical body is not considered permanent. After death, consciousness is believed to continue its journey, while the body that remains behind no longer holds the same spiritual importance it once did. The geography of the Tibetan Plateau also provides important historical context. Much of the region lies thousands of meters above sea level, where the climate can be extremely cold and the ground difficult to work. Trees suitable for large-scale cremation fires have historically been scarce in many high-altitude areas. Over generations, different Tibetan communities developed funeral customs suited to both their spiritual traditions and their challenging environment. Sky burial became one of the best known of these practices. During the ceremony, specially designated practitioners prepare the deceased according to established customs, allowing the remains to return to nature through scavenging birds, particularly vultures. For many believers, this can be understood as a final act of generosity. Something that is no longer needed is offered to sustain other living creatures. The tradition should not, however, be viewed as a tourist spectacle. Ceremonies are private and sacred, and visitors are generally expected to respect local restrictions. Photography or filming may be prohibited or considered deeply inappropriate at certain locations. Living where the air itself becomes a challenge. Imagine waking up every morning in a place where climbing a staircase can leave an unprepared visitor breathing harder than expected. This is everyday life across much of the Tibetan Plateau, one of the highest inhabited regions on Earth. The plateau has an average elevation of more than 4,000 meters above sea level, earning it the nickname, the roof of the world. At this altitude, lower atmospheric pressure means each breath delivers fewer oxygen molecules to the body. For newcomers, that can cause headaches, fatigue, dizziness, poor sleep, or shortness of breath while the body adjusts. Yet what is difficult for visitors has been home to Tibetan Highlanders for generations. Scientists have spent decades studying their adaptation to high-altitude hypoxia. Research has found differences in breathing, circulation, and hemoglobin levels. Genetic studies have also identified variants involving EPAS1, a gene linked to the body's response to low oxygen conditions. A scientific review published for 2026 describes Tibetan Highlanders as one of the world's clearest examples of human adaptation to extreme altitude. Researchers have found that their biological response differs from that of some other high-altitude populations, suggesting humans can follow different evolutionary paths under similar environmental pressures. Altitude shapes daily life. Transportation, farming, construction, physical work, and even the pace of travel must take the environment into account. Visitors usually need time to acclimatize before attempting demanding activities, and this may be one of the most remarkable things about real life in Tibet. For an outsider, the thin air can feel like an invisible barrier. For communities deeply connected to this plateau, it is simply part of the landscape, a powerful reminder of how adaptable the human body can be in one of Earth's most demanding environments. A train journey where oxygen becomes part of the ride. There are train journeys that cross deserts, forests, and mountains. And then there is the Qinghai-Tibet Railway, a remarkable route that carries passengers into some of the highest terrain reached by a major railway anywhere on Earth. Connecting Xining with Lhasa, the railway stretches for roughly 1,956 kilometers. Its most extraordinary section crosses the Tibetan Plateau, where extreme altitude, freezing temperatures, and permafrost created enormous engineering challenges. The line officially reached Lhasa and opened for full operation in 2006. At its highest point, near the Potala Pass, the railway climbs to approximately 5,072 meters above sea level. That is higher than many famous mountain peaks around the world. At such elevations, the reduced availability of oxygen can become a serious challenge for passengers who have not adapted to high altitude. This is why trains operating on the route were designed with special oxygen supply systems. Oxygen can be introduced into passenger cars to help maintain a more comfortable environment, while individual oxygen outlets may also be available when additional support is needed. The windows are also designed to help protect passengers from strong ultraviolet radiation at high elevations. But perhaps the most unforgettable part of the journey is outside the window. Passengers travel through enormous grasslands, snow-covered mountains, remote settlements, and landscapes where wild animals may sometimes be spotted in the distance. The railway also passes through environmentally sensitive areas, requiring engineers to build sections intended to reduce disruption to wildlife movement. As of 2026, rail transportation remains one of the most fascinating ways to understand the immense scale and geography of the Tibetan Plateau. The tea that tastes nothing like tea. Imagine arriving in Tibet on a freezing morning and being offered a steaming cup of tea. You take your first sip expecting something sweet or refreshing, but instead, you taste something rich, salty, and surprisingly buttery. Welcome to one of Tibet's most distinctive traditional drinks, butter tea. Known locally as po cha, this famous beverage is traditionally prepared using tea, salt, and butter made from yak or yak cattle milk. The ingredients are mixed together to create a warm, creamy drink that can feel more like a light soup than the tea many Americans are familiar with. For first-time visitors, the flavor can be one of the biggest culinary surprises in Tibet. But butter tea was not created to impress tourists. It developed as a practical part of daily life in a high-altitude environment where temperatures can be extremely low and people historically needed energy-rich foods and drinks. The butter adds fat and calories, while the hot liquid provides warmth and hydration. In traditional households, butter tea may be served repeatedly throughout the day, especially when welcoming guests. Drinking it can become a social experience as much as a culinary one, reflecting the importance of hospitality in Tibetan culture. The story becomes even more interesting when you consider where the tea itself comes from. Much of the Tibetan Plateau is too cold and high for large-scale tea cultivation. Historically, tea reached Tibet through trade networks connecting the plateau with tea-producing regions farther east and south, becoming an important commodity in exchanges that developed over centuries. As of 2026, butter tea remains one of the most recognizable symbols of traditional Tibetan food culture, although recipes and drinking habits naturally vary between communities and modern households. In Tibet, a simple cup of tea tells a much bigger story, one of climate, survival, trade, hospitality, and the remarkable ways human culture adapts to one of the highest environments on Earth. The animal that makes life possible on the high plateau. Across the vast grasslands of the Tibetan Plateau, one animal appears so often that it has become almost inseparable from the landscape itself. With its long, thick coat and powerful body, the yak is not simply an iconic animal of Tibet. For generations of highland communities, it has been one of the foundations of everyday life. Yaks are remarkably suited to extreme environments. Domestic yaks commonly live at elevations between roughly 3,000 and 5,000 meters above sea level, where temperatures can fall far below freezing and oxygen levels are much lower than at the coast. Their dense coats provide insulation, while their bodies have biological adaptations that help them function in thin mountain air. For traditional herding communities, the yak can provide an extraordinary range of resources. Its milk is used to produce butter and other dairy products, while yak fiber and hair can be turned into ropes, textiles, and practical household materials. Dried dung has historically been used as an important source of fuel in high-altitude regions where trees and firewood may be scarce. Yaks have also served as pack animals, carrying supplies across difficult mountain terrain that would challenge many other domesticated animals. This close relationship between people and livestock has helped pastoral communities survive in environments where conventional agriculture can be extremely difficult. Today, the wider Himalayan and Tibetan Plateau regions are home to millions of domestic yaks, although exact population estimates vary by source, location, and classification. Wild yaks are a very different story. They are far less numerous and are classified as vulnerable, making conservation of their remaining populations an important environmental concern. As of 2026, modernization continues to transform transportation, agriculture, and daily life across the plateau. Yet the yak remains economically and culturally important to many communities. The tiny highland treasure that can be worth a fortune. Hidden among the grasslands of the Tibetan Plateau is something so small that an inexperienced visitor could walk directly past it without noticing. Yet for some highland communities, finding it can mean earning a significant part of their annual income. It is known as Yartsa Gunbu, often associated internationally with caterpillar fungus. Its unusual life cycle has made it one of the most fascinating natural products found across parts of the Tibetan Plateau and Himalayan regions. The organism begins when a parasitic fungus infects the larva of certain underground moth species. Eventually, a small fungal stalk emerges above the soil. During the harvesting season, collectors carefully search the grasslands for these tiny brown stalks, which can be extremely difficult to distinguish from the surrounding vegetation. What makes the story remarkable is its economic value. High-quality specimens can command extraordinary prices in specialized markets, although prices vary dramatically depending on size, quality, origin, market conditions, and the level at which they are sold. In some years and markets, premium products have reportedly reached values equivalent to tens of thousands of United States dollars per kilogram. For certain rural communities, the harvesting season has become an important source of household income. Families may spend weeks searching high-altitude meadows, carefully examining the ground for a discovery that measures only a few centimeters. Demand is strongly connected to its long history in traditional medicine and its reputation as a valuable health product. However, modern scientific research has not established many of the dramatic health claims sometimes promoted commercially. It is therefore important to separate cultural tradition and market reputation from medically proven benefits. The pilgrims who travel extraordinary distances. On the roads leading toward Tibet's most sacred places, you may witness a sight that stops you in your tracks. Some pilgrims are not simply walking toward their destination. They are moving forward through repeated full-body prostrations, continuing a spiritual journey that can require extraordinary patience and determination. Pilgrimage has played an important role in Tibetan Buddhist culture for centuries. Sacred destinations such as Lhasa, the Jokhang Temple, and Mount Kailash attract pilgrims from different regions and religious traditions. Some travel relatively short distances, while others may spend weeks or even months completing their journeys. One of the most recognizable practices involves taking a few steps, bringing the hands together in prayer, kneeling, and extending the body forward in a full prostration. The pilgrim then rises and repeats the process. Over long distances, progress can be incredibly slow. The meaning behind this practice is deeply spiritual. Prostration can represent devotion, humility, and the purification of negative actions. For believers, the difficulty of the journey is not necessarily an obstacle to avoid. It can become part of the religious practice itself. Another important tradition is the Kora, the act of moving around a sacred site in a clockwise direction. In Lhasa, pilgrims can be seen following traditional circuits around important religious landmarks, often turning handheld prayer wheels as they walk. Farther west, Mount Kailash rises to more than 6,600 meters above sea level and is considered sacred by followers of several religions. The traditional pilgrimage circuit around the mountain extends for roughly 50 kilometers and reaches an extremely high mountain pass, making the journey physically demanding. As of 2026, these pilgrimage traditions remain among the most visible expressions of spiritual life associated with Tibetan culture, although individual practices and experiences vary widely. The palace that rises above the roof of the world. Standing high above the city of Lhasa is a building so extraordinary that it has become one of the most recognizable symbols of Tibet. Rising dramatically from Marpo-ri, or Red Hill, the Potala Palace appears almost like a fortress suspended between the earth and the sky. The palace stands at an elevation of approximately 3,700 meters above sea level. According to UNESCO, the present complex developed from the 17th century, although the site has connections to much earlier Tibetan history. For centuries, the Potala served as an important center of Tibetan religious and political life and was closely associated with successive Dalai Lamas. The scale of the structure is remarkable. The palace rises more than 100 meters above the hill and contains 13 levels. Its enormous stone walls, maze-like corridors, chapels, halls, and historic chambers create a complex that dominates the Lhasa skyline. The complex is traditionally divided into two major sections. The White Palace historically contained administrative and residential areas, while the Red Palace was primarily devoted to religious functions. Inside are numerous chapels, sacred objects, murals, sculptures, manuscripts, and other works reflecting centuries of Tibetan Buddhist art and history. One of the most surprising facts is how such a monumental structure was created in a high-altitude environment centuries before modern construction machinery. Building at this elevation meant working in thin air while transporting huge quantities of stone, timber, and other materials. In 1994, the Potala Palace was inscribed on UNESCO's World Heritage List. The Jokhang Temple Monastery and Norbulinka were later added as extensions, creating what UNESCO officially recognizes as the historic ensemble of the Potala Palace, Lhasa. The simple food that helped people survive the high plateau. In a place where the climate is cold, the growing season is short, and farming can become difficult at extreme elevations. Survival has always depended on making the most of what the land can provide. And in Tibet, one remarkably simple food has remained deeply connected to everyday life for generations. It is called tsampa. Tsampa is traditionally made from roasted barley flour, usually produced from Highland barley, one of the most important crops cultivated across the Tibetan Plateau. Unlike many grains that struggle in cold, high-altitude environments, Barley can grow under relatively harsh conditions, making it especially valuable to communities living thousands of meters above sea level. The preparation may appear surprisingly simple. Roasted barley is ground into flour and can then be mixed with butter tea or other liquids. The mixture is often shaped by hand into small portions before being eaten. Because the grain has already been roasted, tsampa can be prepared quickly without requiring lengthy cooking. For travelers expecting an elaborate dish, the first experience may seem almost too basic. But that simplicity is exactly what makes tsampa so practical. It is portable, relatively easy to store, energy-dense, and well-suited to a lifestyle shaped by high altitude and long journeys. Historically, these qualities made it particularly useful for herders, travelers, pilgrims, and families living far from major settlements. Highland barley itself has a much larger story. Archaeological and scientific research indicates that barley agriculture played an important role in allowing permanent human settlement to expand into the higher elevations of the Tibetan Plateau thousands of years ago. The crop became closely connected not only to food, but also to local culture and agricultural traditions. Where ancient traditions meet modern life. Perhaps the most surprising thing about Tibet is not a single ritual, food, animal, or building. It is the contrast you can encounter in everyday life, a world where centuries-old traditions exist alongside technology and rapidly developing infrastructure. Walk through parts of Lhasa, and this contrast can become immediately visible. Pilgrims follow traditional religious circuits around sacred sites, while elsewhere in the city, residents use smartphones, shop in modern stores, and travel along busy urban roads. Ancient monasteries and historic neighborhoods share the wider landscape with contemporary buildings and transportation networks. The transformation has been especially significant in transportation. The Qinghai-Tibet Railway reached Lhasa in 2006, connecting the city directly to China's national rail network. Later railway development expanded connections within the region, while highways and airports have also changed how people and goods move across the plateau. Communication has changed as well. Mobile phones and internet services have become part of modern daily life in populated areas, although access and connectivity can differ considerably between cities and remote communities. For younger generations, digital technology exists alongside cultural traditions inherited from parents and grandparents. Yet modernization does not mean that the past has simply disappeared. Traditional festivals, Tibetan Buddhist practices, pilgrimage routes, local foods, herding traditions, and distinctive forms of art and architecture continue to shape cultural life. In pastoral areas, some families remain closely connected to livestock and seasonal landscapes, while urban residents may experience a very different rhythm of life. The story of Tibet today is the story of these two worlds existing side by side. Tradition and modernity, memory and change, all unfolding beneath the same vast Himalayan sky. From ancient traditions and sacred pilgrimages to breathtaking landscapes and modern cities, Tibet is a place of extraordinary contrasts. Life on the roof of the world reminds us just how deeply people can adapt to nature while carrying their culture, beliefs, and traditions into a changing world.